Welcome to the Broadcast Exchange from Newscast Studio. I'm your host, Dak Dillon. On the Exchange, we talk with those leading the future of broadcast design, technology, and content. Today, I'm joined by design leads Jim of Lightwell and Toby of BK Design Projects. The team recently completed BBC's virtual environment for the Winter Olympics in Beijing, using the Unreal Engine paired with Vizrt to create a dynamic studio and even building some mountains in the process. Thanks for joining me today to talk about the BBC's unique presentation of the Olympics. You've learned a lot since you created the Tokyo studios, which also relied on this heavily virtual production pipeline. Walk us through those lessons and then how that's set up where we are today with Beijing.
Lessons, yeah. I mean, it's a funny one because it's not just lessons, I guess, from Tokyo. I think it's also lessons from Pres 2, which is the in-house studio that we worked on for the BBC, which launched a few months prior to Tokyo. And in essence, the Winter Olympics studio, it's that studio. It's from the same green screen studio, and it's a modified version of that virtual set. So whereas previously we were using, or the BBC have been using, a main presenting space with windows, and then beyond the windows, it's a photographic environment. So having seen the potential of what could be done on Tokyo, we thought, why not? Let's go for it. Let's have a bit of fun with this one, and decided to try out the landscaping tools in Unreal. We started looking at this. It was actually before Tokyo, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Am I right, Toby?
It was March or April last year. I think the biggest thing in terms of lessons learned from Tokyo was the kind of multi-level approach where you're offering the editorial team various different positions that they can use for different program strands. And that was fantastic in Tokyo. Everyone loved that. And that sense of directors being able to explore and find new spaces to create their programs. And that's kind of what was at the core of this idea of creating multiple levels and different presentation spaces outside as well as inside.
I'm a huge fan of serendipity, and I think there's a lot of that in there. But I also like to think that the serendipity is only going to happen if you've got some decent design ideas and a decent context in terms of the design to start with. It's about just extending on what we've done before, and it's a team we've worked with previously on quite a few jobs now, and we've got to know them quite well. So we tend to know what they like, and we tend to know what they don't like. And I think that helps as a designer when you've got a better idea of what will appeal to the client and what the client can make use of. And I think what's really happened with the Beijing Winter Olympics studio is that the BBC's taken ownership of it. They're doing things that we kind of thought would be good, but they're taking it just that stage further. I guess one good example of that is there's a seating position where when we were putting together packs of presentation images for the designers in its initial stages, we were sort of spinning around the Unreal model, and we had a look back at the building from within the landscape, and immediately it's like, yeah, this is interesting. Can we make use of this? So, of course, being a design presentation, we dropped in a 3D figure, set up a fairly standard sort of mid-shot with the building in the background, out of focus, but getting that sense of a presenter in the landscape, and thinking, this will be sort of top of the show. They'll do a quick announcement there, then move inside, and that sort of then developed. You can tell they were interested because they then said, well, can we have a floor? Because the presenter was floating in the sky. So yeah, we built a little hill for them to stand on. And of course, if it's just snow, that's not very interesting. So you put some rocks in there just to break up the landscape. And the next thing you know is, you're being asked if they can sit on the rocks. So you put in a rock that they can sit on, and then it's, could there be a bench? And we had a little bar area, so we pulled a bench across. And the next thing we know, they're borrowing stills from elsewhere in the BBC, covering them with leftover bits of green screen. Hey presto, there's a brand new presentation space, called The Bench, and it's an informal space, and it just works. But it's working because we've done all the hard work in the landscape and the rest of the design, and I think those kind of things have been what's really rewarding about this particular project.
Now, you mentioned Studio Press 2. For those who are not familiar with that space, just give us a quick overview of that piece of the project that kind of led up to this kind of design iconography that you all have settled on.
It was a kind of lost studio that was never really used, and they wanted to create a green screen, generic environment. We created a kind of multi-level environment for them. And the idea was at the outset that this would be something that there would be areas that we would never even think about using, possibly in the next year or the year after. It would be a constantly evolving scenario. And that was embraced hugely by the BBC. It's been very successful. It's been massively overbooked, so much so that it's difficult to get into the studio to do testing and all the rest of it. So it's kind of we've been a victim of our own success in that respect. It's been quite hard to get time to test new environments in there. But that formed the basis of this new studio.
So taking what you learned from Press 2, you have these sleek white columns, you have this embedded fireplace, you have these sweeping panoramic mountain scenes. Kind of walk us through the design for the Olympics.
The architecture was there. As you say, sleek, modern environment was there. We needed to create something that had warmth, so we added the fireplace and things like that. And there were certain kind of things we had to do within the actual set. Like we added a kind of ice to the kind of the sunken floor areas. The main thrust of the whole project really was the landscape. And that's where we had an amazing time, and Unreal was fantastic and Jim was amazing. And we learned so much. But yeah, creating that 3D environment, a giant map, was really the kind of thrust of the whole thing. And then placing our presentation decks out actually in the snow as part of that. And we discussed things like, should they be wearing kind of quilted jackets, and how far. I think what's interesting about the whole thing is you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, because we're not yet in the world of photorealism. It's almost, we have people in Tokyo who thought we were in Tokyo. We never thought that would be the case. I have had people say to me, are they out in Beijing? And I'm like, have you actually seen Beijing? It doesn't look anything like this lovely alpine, snowy background. It was an exploration, the idea of using Unreal to create a landscape.
It was a bit of a punt on our part in that there was no guarantee of any work. It was hey guys, what do you think to this? And, it's probably fair to say that there's probably a bit of our inner Ken Adam coming into it, in that it's almost like a Bond baddie embedded in the mountainscape. It was having a sense of fun and having a play, and a what if, what if we did this? What if we tried that? Wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And I think that's where a tool like Unreal is fantastic, because we were able to just develop that and play with that and really have a lot of fun with that kind of idea. At the end of the day, there's ski tracks in front of the building, all the paraphernalia that you might find around a ski resort. But at the end of the day, it was let's have fun with this. That's one of the nice things about working with sport, TV sport, is that it can be, it can be quite playful.
You've mentioned Unreal many times, and this is, I believe you've told me before, one of your first big projects where you've done most of the design and development straight in Unreal and not necessarily in Cinema 4D or another piece of software first. How did that change your workflows and just the way you even thought about conceptualizing these spaces?
Massively, because take Tokyo. Tokyo started out, it was but Toby would build a model, send it to me. I'd do something, send it back to him, and it was like this game of tennis with models going backwards and forwards between packages, which is not ideal. It was just sort of swapping ideas like that. And then our pitch presentation was rendered in V-Ray, and we did an animation for that. And of course, that meant making sure that certain parts of the model were finished so many days in advance, and that spare machines were churning away for a few days just to render out all the frames of the animation. With this Olympics, because we just thought, yeah, whatever, let's just go for it. We've got the main bit, the main space already, or we've got the shell already in Unreal, and we just started adding to it in there and in Unreal, taking bits into Unreal. And because we had that power to move around and see things, it was about exploring, about finding out what worked. And I think that helped. It helped as we took out quite a few things, but we also saw opportunities and potential, and we were able to bring that in, and not just bring it in as a suggestion, but bring it in as something more credible, something more viable. When you think, well, what if we had some decking? So you add some decking, and then you add a snow particle system, and all those things start coming together, and it's like the picture, really starts to evolve. It's really sort of fluid. You're not spending your time waiting for a render to finish, which is the most depressing thing ever now. If we had a presentation, we'd then, in a fairly short space of time, put together a short animated sequence. Being television, that showing the client something as a volume in which a camera can move is that's gold. That really is gold.
Typically, certainly towards the latter stages of developing the design, we would spend best part of a day or like a whole afternoon on Zoom. We would be in the Unreal model. Jim would be moving around, and and it's just incredible. Jim would be painting snow, and we'd be saying, okay, let's lift the mountain here, and let's paint some trees. Obviously there are lots of lessons to learn about resolution of things, paring stuff back and optimization, but actually the process of designing, it's so incredibly fluid. Just the idea of stepping back to where we were, like Jim said, even a year ago, just feels kind of inconceivable. And the idea of waiting for something to render is just madness. So it's been kind of really exciting, really thrilling, I think.
And then the final product was integrated with Vizrt, the Viz Engine 4, and a variety of their other tool sets. So talk about that process and about then making it all sync.
The great thing about working with a client like the BBC is that they've been using Viz for forever. And there's a good knowledge base within the BBC, and it's a really good team of people working in the graphics department at the BBC. So our main point of contact there was a guy called Andy Bowker. In a similar way to myself and Toby passing models backwards and forwards at the beginning of the process, towards the end, it's myself and Andy passing copies of the Unreal project backwards and forwards, and then making adjustments. I think what's been really good this time is Andy's also been involved in the Pres 2 work. So Andy understands not only that studio, but he understands this project, and he understands this design as well. So he's been able to suggest things along the way. The penguins, the deer, and the polar bear are all down to Andy. He's been able to take on that whole process of taking the Unreal project and doing the integration with Viz. And he also takes on a sort of responsibility beyond that in interacting with the virtual set operators who work in the gallery at broadcast time.
The studio has a lot of virtual screens in it as well, so that way they can bring in highlights or queue up graphics. Talk about the challenges of integrating those into a virtual space and making sure the presenters or the talent can fully utilize and understand even what they're looking at.
For Pres 2, we had designed into the scenario a projector. which projects an image onto the green cyc. So we have a standing position, which essentially is used for all the setups in the Winter Olympics. It's a very, very small area of the set to one side of the studio, where we have two standing presentation positions, and in between them we have our projection zone. So really, that then defines your position of all the screens within the virtual space. Obviously, sometimes we didn't do that, in which case you need to have a floor monitor giving you an eye line. Actual design of the screens, you want to make screens feel as believable as possible. So we actually ended up making screens quite chunky rather than, incredibly thin bezel, lightweight screens that you can have. We just felt they were too flimsy to feel like they were believable as an outdoor screen. So we spent a bit of time working on the development of the actual virtual assets for those.
It's almost as if things have to look not as good as they could be. You almost have to degrade the design slightly in order to achieve a greater sense of credibility and believability. There's also areas where we've got the BBC logo on the floor, but we've scuffed it and scratched it and damaged it and just made it look like people have been walking over it for a week or two. And if you've seen that video of Amy Fuller practicing her snowboard in the studio, you could probably understand how that might get damaged like that. But it all adds to that sense of, I guess it's careworn.
We had lots of conversations about exactly that thing about believability, that fine balance, the uncanny valley thing. The closer you get, the more weird things can be. And it's quite a hard area to kind of like make sure you're in a sweet spot.
I think you just answered what I was going to ask. But obviously, when it comes to virtual studios now, we are seeing kind of two approaches, the completely abstract and then those that are much more grounded in reality. And the ones that often fail are those weird ones that are somewhere in the middle where it's like, oh, these are the correct size mullions on a window, but then suddenly the ceiling is 300 feet tall. And this space, what I like about it is it feels absolutely like a real ski lodge. It feels like something that you could find at the top of a gondola in Canada. So it feels very believable when, some of the other studios out there, just like you mentioned, the uncanny valley effect. Are they a spaceship? Where are they exactly? What's that sense of place beyond just the snow behind them?
If a viewer is looking at something and trying to decide what is it, what's it meant to be, then on a certain level we've failed. Whereas I think with the Olympic studio, I don't think there's no guessing. There might be a sense of where are they, which is very different to what is it. And the where are they is a much more interesting conundrum to have. There is an element of that, and I suspect that probably comes from my background is I'm a registered architect. Architecture wasn't very interesting. I moved on to different things, which I'm, so much more engaged in. But I've still got that sense of, I know how big a mullion is. I know how big how high a ceiling would be. If you've got a ceiling any higher than that, well, then where are you getting that glass from? You can't get glass panels. Yeah, and there's all those limiters in my subconscious. We can't do anything too ridiculous. It's almost like we're saying to ourselves, well, how would it be built? What would it be made of? What would the detailing be? What would the joints be?
Every element that we deal with is true to life scale. So every step, every handrail, every beam is justified. If it's a cantilever, it has to be thicker than it has to do its job. And I think you're right. There are lots of sets out there which have a kind of theatricality to them, and they don't tie themselves to those kind of structural rules, really. And they may look great, but there's something about it where you just think, I can't invest in it. I can't believe in it. And the person standing in it doesn't feel like they're the part of that scene. Yeah, I mean, all of our excitement really comes from architecture. It's an amazing place at the moment to be able to play in such an environmental way, creating spaces that are more like buildings than they are like sets. I don't feel really we're set designing anymore. I think we're designing environments. But it is interesting how out there people still are doing, there's kind of fourth wall, kind of quite stagey feeling virtual sets where you just think it's almost like a proscenium approach to theatricality, which is kind of bizarre because we can do anything. And yet we're stuck in a kind of Victorian theatre sometimes.
For it to work really well, it has to be really spot on with all the details, or it has to be completely abstract, where then, you just have a bunch of floating glass in an abstract space, because then it's fake and you don't conceptualize that in your brain as being real. But even in Beijing, even the snow is fake for this Olympics. So everything is a little bit man-made. In terms of virtual production and what you all are doing, what challenges are still out there that really need to be solved to make your workflows better, to make the models better, just for any of it?
Ooh, I think possibly performance issues. Obviously creating a virtual environment as opposed to a virtual set, it's much more expansive. Unreal is great at handling those large data sets, but I'm still getting used to the idea that you can't populate every single part that you see for every shot with the highest level of details.
For me, it's all about lighting, the quality of lighting and the quality of contact of the presenter within the virtual space. I just want to see fantastic contact shadows, fantastic reflections. That's limiting for us. Specifically, I know Vizrt are developing that, and that's obviously just around the corner. So there's lots just around the corner, but the closer you get, the further you feel you are in a way.
The contact shadows and contact reflections, it's coming in now, and I think it may have been possible to do more with that at the Olympics, but this comes back to the issues with the popularity of the Press 2 studio, in that it was so busy, and before the Olympics it was busy with the Australian Open tennis, so there wasn't any opportunity for the guys at the BBC to actually test those features properly, to get them working properly. It's integrating the presenter with the virtual set, and a lot of that comes through, it's either shadows or it's reflections. And if you've got a real floor, that's great, but a real floor can be limiting. You have to trade off the flexibility of, are they on ice? Are they on wood? Are they on snow? So those are the three different virtual floors we've got at the moment. If we had just one floor material that's a magic carpet that's traveling around this virtual world, which they are constantly stood on.
A thing for me that would be really interesting to explore more is to have full control of the lighting within the virtual space from the gallery, so we can work more closely with a lighting director. I've had tantalizing experiences of the possibilities of doing that, but haven't fully embraced that yet. That feels like a no-brainer. That has to be the way. You have to have a full control of virtual and physical lighting. And of course, that's money. Yeah, ideally, you want moving lights. You can adjust all the color temperatures on the fly, and it's all preset. And of course, people are doing that, but you need the budget to do that.
Everything's making a demand on that graphics card, and it all starts and finishes at the graphics card. As graphics cards get bigger, the software and the designers will try and stuff more through the graphics card. So we're always going to need more. I've been doing this now since, blimey, I think my first 3D with a render was 1995, an Aki render with Pentium 120s with like 128 megabytes of RAM, and you were always trying to sort of cut the polygons down, cut the lights down, and wait a few hours for a pretty awful, but at the time felt fantastic ray trace render, and it feels a lot like that again, but sort of so many generations on, and it's exciting. It really is exciting.
In terms of the R&D, you've talked a lot about just that process. Is it a process that is longer than a traditional scenic load-in and training, or is it something that it's still going to be a little quicker just getting the set up and running on the virtual side.
I think when the hardware's there, when the studio setup's there, it's probably pretty quick. I mean, we could probably turn something round and get it loaded in fairly short order now. As to how many days that would be, I don't know, but everything depends on the complexity. If you've already thought about it properly, you already understand the limits of the physical space and how that physical space relates to the virtual set and vice versa. So you already know where you expect your talent to be within that design. You already know where you expect the cameras to be and where the cameras can't go. This should get more fluent and faster. But again, as things get more complex, then we'll want to do more complex things. So that may slow it down again.
It's a conversation we had with John Murphy, who's head of graphics, creative head of graphics at BBC. And we were kind of laughing and saying, I think the general assumption is if it's green screen, it's kind of easy because there's nothing there. You just got to plug it in and play. But actually, in terms of time and cost, currently, as it stands, it's more expensive than a comparable physical set install in terms of the kind of the time setting it all up. It's very difficult because you can't compare it anymore because obviously we can't build what we're building physically. It's not like we could even attempt to do it. So the physical elements become way simpler, but all of your time and budget is going on the virtual side of stuff. And I think it's generally costing more, I would say, at the moment. But that's because there's so much of ironing out of issues. But I think every production is having that. I don't think anyone has it easy. I don't think anyone's cracked it and they're just like breezing through stuff. I think everyone is having to deal with, the latest versions and graphics cards and, there's an issue with the Moses box and swap that out and do that. Do you know what I mean? There's constant stuff that's happening.
To wrap up, what's next for what you all are working on?
We're currently working on a pitch for the Commonwealth Games, which takes place in Birmingham this summer. I'm doing a lot of work with Bloomberg in the UK, who are kind of expanding their studio facilities here.
And I'm currently working my way through every regional studio for ABC Australia. So it's February in England. The weather's miserable, and I have to spend my day looking at photographs of beautiful sunsets in Hobart or Tasmania. It's it's just to make me feel worse. If any broadcasters out there would like a studio design for the World Cup, we're ready.
I say the world of sports never stops. There's always that next event, and I'm sure soon you'll have to start thinking about another Olympiad only 2 short years away. Thanks for listening to the Broadcast Exchange. Make sure to subscribe for the latest Broadcast Exchange episodes on your favorite podcast platform or watch our video episodes on YouTube. To learn more, visit broadcastexchange.show. Have a question you'd like answered on the show? Send us a tweet at Newscast Studio.